In three, two, one. When people look at a car, they tend to immediately associate it with a brand or maybe just a family name, like Ferrari, Porsche, or DeLorean are a few that come to mind. But in actuality, it takes hundreds of people to make a car truly come to life. From the imaginations of designers to the complex calculations of engineers and programmers, down through the manufacturing process with tool and die teams, chassis builders, as well as assembly and quality assurance, and everything in between. With well over 40 years of experience in the heart of American automaking in Detroit, our guest has seen it all. And in the late 70s and early 80s, he could be seen running what was at the time a state-of-the-art 1,200-ton hydraulic press, the largest of its kind in any plant. It was his job to take new development dies and make them into parts for a very special build. He fondly remembers getting the orders one day for gull wing doors in stainless steel, suddenly realizing that these parts were destined for the new DMC-12. With us tonight to talk in depth about the manufacturing side of the automotive business is Tony Vallelunga, Senior Director of Manufacturing and Quality at D&G Motors. And I'd also like to welcome back my co-host, the one and only Kat DeLorean, to Break Fix. So welcome to you both to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So, Tony, like all good break fix stories, everybody has a superhero origin. So, talk to us about the who, what, when, and where of Tony V, the petrol head. How did it all get started for you? Did you come up from an automaking family, or did you get interested in cars as a kid? And take us on the journey into how you started working in Motown.
Well, the journey started when I was a kid. My father had a 1957 Chevrolet, and he would always, it was fairly new at the time, but he taught me how to do maintenance on it, right? But when I saw all the fancy styling on it, all the chrome, the bumpers on the hood and everything else, I was just in awe, right? And that's how it started. My mechanical ability when I was a little kid, always wanted to, I had a curiosity how mechanical things ran. You know, when I was a kid, I asked my father if I could tear apart the lawnmower engine. He said, sure, go ahead, right? So that's really how it all started for me. The cars of the 50s and 60s, you know. From there, my curiosity was one that, how do we make cars? What's involved, right? How do we make a fender? How do we get a quarter panel, right? My curiosity is curiosity, right? But that's pretty much how it all started for me, you know, and it just bloomed from there, you know.
So I've heard tell stories of, you grow up in the greater Detroit area. There's certain schools that everybody goes to. I even met somebody the other day that said, I went to school at the same place that John DeLorean went. Not the same year, but the same place. And they're all sort of involved in the automotive world at some point and in some way, especially being in Detroit. So how did you find yourself coming up through the system, and then where did you end up? Like, we know John's story, right? He started at Packard and then he moved to other places and so on down the line. So what's your journey like?
My journey started in school, actually junior high. We had programs offered. They taught us how to do household wiring, wood shop, metal shop, and so on, carried through high school. And I was in on all those classes. I also had in high school 3 years of auto mechanics. And you had auto one, auto two, and then you had a technical course in your third year of high school, right? And they will either gear you to whatever you wanted to do after high school. So I thought about, do I want to work on cars or do I want to build cars, right? I had an opportunity. Well, I chose to build instead of being a mechanic. And that's how it started, Then I had the fascination of manufacturing. I was just always so curious. Well, being in a Motown here, back years ago, there was almost a tool and die shop in every corner, you know, and
I
to
mean,
start,
I remember the story of Tucker, right? He was doing tool and die out of his shed.
yes, that's just how it starts, right? And there's all kinds of manufacturing around here, everything you can imagine, right? And I just always wanted to stick with stampings, you know. I had a curiosity how you take a flat piece of metal and turn it into a fender. It's truly magical, you know. Um, and that's about it. I mean,
So is that something you went to school for? Is that you learned it on the floor of the factories?
I learned it on the floor of the factory. There was some schooling, some taught on the floor. You know, it was your choice, however you wanted to pursue it, you know. But most everything I learned was on the floor, right? Even some of your small shops will have classes for education, right? Um, some that are
Where
for and still get credits through whatever classes they give you, you get college credits for, right? But you could either go full part-time to college, work full-time, or however you want to do it, right? But most everything I learned was on the floor. You know, you learn by doing, you know.
weren't you in an apprenticeship program, much like we want to help kids go into when you first started?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, the apprenticeship program, you have to have 4 years of college and working or 8 years experience, you know. So it still will get you the job you need, but it's just how you want to pursue it, you know. But yeah, apprenticeship program. That's it.
So
You
where did
know,
you cut your teeth?
I cut my teeth at MSI Prototype and Engineering, uh, right where I met John. And that was the start of it. You know, I had worked previously in smaller so-called job shops and went over there and it was a perfect opportunity. We did everything there, you know, from woodwork to plaster to a foundry, everything you could imagine for manufacturing, everything you ever needed. Um, just a golden opportunity I had at the time.
So
You
this
know,
would have been circa the late 60s, early 70s then, or
mid 70s,
okay.
mid 70s.
So John had started to have some gray coming in right at that point. So what
Yeah,
was your first impression of him?
it was like a walking saint, you know. It's the only ways I could describe it, right? Uh, I don't know what else to say, right? He was the man of the day, you know. Um, you
So
never
would
forget
you
it.
say his reputation preceded him, especially all the work that he had done at Pontiac and at Studebaker and Packard, etc.?
And so on. Yes, he did very well for himself. We all knew at the time we did other work, prototype work, right? But we knew when John came through, we knew who he was. We knew that it wasn't just any car. It was a gull wing car. And not only was it a gull wing car, but it was made out of stainless steel. Totally awesome. Awesome experience, you know, to be able to do that because it was unheard of, right? I mean, they did stainless steel before, but never to this extent. You know, they would put stainless steel trim on cars, right? Or gas tanks were made out of stainless steel back in the day, right? But to have a gull wing car, stainless steel, was the most awesome thing in the world, you know. Um, That's about all I could say for that. But what an experience. You never forget it, you know.
So jeans or slacks? What did you see more when John showed up?
Slacks, you know. Um, It's burnt in my memory, but you never forget it, you know. Uh, again, I don't know what else to say. It's this was an awesome experience, something you'll never forget, right? I knew when we were doing this, it was the most awesome thing in the world. And if you can master stainless, you can master anything else, you know,
So,
and I knew that, you
so,
know.
so let's walk that back and unpack it a little bit. And you said it's a bit of a marvel to see how you could take a flat sheet of steel or even stainless steel or aluminum or something else, and suddenly it turns into a fender.
Oh,
So for our audience that's kind of scratching their heads going, well, how does that exactly work? Can you kind of talk us through it? Maybe kind of boil it down and make it easy for folks to understand?
well, how far back do you want to go?
Well,
Uh,
I think
what
there's
details
probably a
do you want to run in?
misunderstanding. I think that go ahead.
Well, you start with the designer, right? And they give us the blueprint. We have blueprints. We turn them into, back then, we turned them into wood models, right? And we copied them in plaster. We would do a die development. So in order to take apart, we just can't take the exact shape and say, hey, we're going to stamp it out. We have to develop curves and shapes for stretch and form to eliminate wrinkles, right? So we call that die development, draw die development. So the guys who do this can basically back then look at a part, see where we need to stretch it, where they know where the wrinkles are going to come in. So they develop the die along with the part. Once they do that, they copy it out of plaster and then they pour the die. We'll say for prototype, we use quartzite. And quartzite's a soft alloy that can be formed and shaped quickly. And once you do the die development, they take it, and back then we had a tracer. And once they pour the die, we had a tracer machine that would cut off the plaster to cut the right patterns in the die. And they pour it, basically clean it up a little bit. We throw it in the press and make parts. It's simple in a way, and in a way it isn't, right? But
Giant metal rubber stamp, right? So
I
once
no, I
that
don't know about a rubber stamp, but
but
for prototype, yes, we do use some rubber to help us along in the beginning. But for the most part, it's a stamping, it's a die development that we have to make sure we can make it in one hit, right?
yeah.
And get an operation. But once you do the die development and it's operational when you get it running, it'll run forever, you know.
But you have to create tool and die for every panel and component that you're pressing out, right? So there's a left fender and a right fender and the doors and the quarter panels and the trunk and the hoods and all that kind of stuff. So it's a pretty big operation to basically punch out all the sheet metal of a car, right?
Huge, very huge. Yes, yes,
So are chassis also stamped out or sections of them?
yes, absolutely. Yes, everything is. Yes, yes,
So
yeah.
to describe how big a facility would be to build a single car, not talking like, all of Chevy's different models that they have, because you have to have tool and die for every single thing, which boggles my mind when you see car designers changing little things every year. It's like you have to re-up all of your tool and
Yes,
die every time you
yes.
make a change.
Hmm.
So how big are these facilities just to create one car, something like the DeLorean DMC 12?
Massive, massive. Yes, just massive. Um, just the dies alone, the checking fixtures. So for each die, for each part, there's a checking fixture. So if you could imagine all these parts that are in a car all have fixtures to check them on, right?
Yeah.
It's this way huge, way huge, you know.
So how many different tools and die are there on average to a vehicle? Like regardless of its size versus, we won't get into convertible versus minivan, that kind of thing.
Well, I could tell you this. For each part on a car, takes 3 to 6 dies to make.
Wow.
Usually your outer skins will take 3 to 4, but any other complex parts takes at least 6 dies.
So that's a layered approach then. You use the first die to make an initial shape, the second one to then stretch
Right.
that
So,
shape and continue from there.
yeah, so you'll have like, we'll say you have a draw die, right? It's the initial form die. Once that's developed, the rest of the dies are pretty fundamental, right? You have a restrike trim, maybe a little reform, but the most important part is to get the first draw die developed, you know. But yeah, that's it.
So in the instance of talking about the original DeLorean, why is stainless so much harder to work with than a lot of the materials we use today?
It's tough material. We look for we call it ductility, and it's the ability to stretch without breaking, right? Uh, Stainless steel is tough. It has less ductility, so it takes more work in the die to get it to form certain shapes. It just takes longer. But regular steel has more formability to it than stainless. You know, um, it's just a different way. You know, and for most people that do tool and die work, stainless steel is rare. It's most people will have a learning curve on it until you get it. But
I mean,
other
the
than
the folks at Kohler and Delta, know how to do it when they're making sinks, right? But they're all square, so it's not too bad.
well, right, but you have in a car, you have all kinds of exotic shapes, right?
Exactly.
Uh, and remember, for most manufacturers, even well today, we build cars at 1 a minute, so these things have to run, right? Uh, really run. If you can imagine all the dies, right? Well, we can't run them all the time. We have to die set them all the time, right? And in various presses. So it's a huge process. It really is.
Is there heat involved in the pressing process?
So on rare occasions, yes. But mostly it depends on whether they try for high volume, try not to, right? But for exotic shapes, yes, sometimes there is heat involved.
A little bit of persuasion, right?
Yes, yes. Well, yeah, it's very important, right?
So
Um,
how different? So between metals, you were talking about the ductibility of the metal. There's also the malleability of the metal, right? Its ability to fold without breaking as well.
yeah.
So I wonder how different are the dies for metals versus those of, let's say, carbon fiber or fiberglass, or are they the same?
Well, you still will have, so for carbon fiber, right, you use a type of vacuum form and to get your shape, but it still has to be cut and trimmed and holes put in and everything else. But to get your shape, yeah, it's done the same way. You got to cast it, right, get your shape, and however you want to form.
So let me ask you this. Could you use an old die, let's say the left front fender of a DeLorean, and suddenly make it out of fiberglass or carbon fiber instead of stainless? Or do you have to you have to make a whole new die?
Yes, it's a different type of die. Yes, it's a different process.
But you could use the old die as a mold for your other
Yes, you
material.
once you have the shape, yes. Yes, you can do that. Yes,
Very
absolutely.
cool.
Yeah.
We've been nerding out here, Kat. Sorry. Where do you
Oh,
want to
go
go?
ahead. Ask away, right?
No, as he's describing all of these process, I have a picture on my desktop of the old car and the new car. So if you see me getting lost, it's because I'm listening to him describe doing all of these processes and thinking about how it would apply to manufacturing the new car, which is kind of what's happened to my brain lately. Everything goes back to manufacturing the new car. But I love hearing about just I Tony's been talking to me for quite some time now about all of the different processes that go into building a car, and it never gets boring to listen to. It's always amazing to hear just how much goes into a car. And a car a minute, I hadn't heard that. That's staggering that we've come that far to be able to do that. It's astonishing.
You can't even eat M&Ms that fast. I mean,
Yeah, I know.
they're flying through these cars. So, you saw, uh, so on our show, we talk a lot about design and cars and how styles have changed over the years. And there's been periods for, just certain shapes. There was the wedge period in the 70s, and you had all the boxy cars with round headlights in the 80s. And going back to what you were talking about, the 50s, it was all the big fins and, the swooping designs versus the cars that came before them were very much, let's say, Beetle-like, to use a car analogy. So are there certain shapes that are easier or harder to manufacture than others?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yes.
So I'm going to guess the square cars are probably easier to make than the round ones.
Every shape has its own challenge, never say never, right? But yeah, they all have their own challenge, right?
So when
Imagine
you
making those fins back in the day, and how it's
yeah,
right?
I can't believe the guys that were hand hammering out the old cars, right, from the 30s and 40s and stuff. That's just masterful work in and of itself. But I wonder, when you look at the DMC-12 versus the DMG and you look at their shapes, obviously they're radically different. One inspired the other, right? It's an evolution of a thought, as we talked to Angel Guerrera on a previous episode. So when you look at it from a more technical approach and you compare the two cars, having worked on the original and now gearing up to tool up and die the new car, what are some of the things that you see on the new design that may pose a challenge in the manufacturing process, or something you go, oh my God, this is so much easier than the early cars were?
I look at it when I look at the car. So I'll look at something and picture it in my head, and I can envision how to make the dies, where to split them off at, right? What will work and not work. I look at the car and I already have in my head what I would want to do with it. I look at the shapes and I look what's easy, what's going to be hard on it, right? Maybe if we made the hood, I would look at it and say, hey, well, maybe we'll have the hood shape and fenders a certain way, and this is where we'll body open the hood in a certain area, right? Because I know in my head that we can make a die to do this and still have it look right and still be functional. So that's what goes through my head when I look at a vehicle, the shapes, how many dies, right? And it just comes automatic to me, but that's just me.
I want the superpower, Tony. I want to be able to like look at a car and just be able to pick it apart and see it. I can imagine in your head it just turns into like explodes into body panels and you
Yes,
can turn it around. Yeah.
it does. Yeah, I'll look at it. I'll look at a shape. Okay, well, that's doable. And maybe this won't be doable. So we're going to change this. And that's just how I think. That's my thought process, But yeah, I could just look at it and know, you know. But today, that's all different. Today, we have draw die simulators that will simulate the forming of metal in a die, right? A certain way we're going to tip the die or shape it, right?
How has that improved the manufacturing process? So being able to actually use the technology before you have to put it into production, how has that improved the whole overall process?
I believe it helps most people out who don't understand draw dies, because when they do, when they see it in a simulation, it will click. It clicks in their head. Oh yeah, right. So it makes sense. But we didn't have draw die simulators years ago. And we just knew in our head from doing, you know. Usually a generic fender or a generic quarter panel or a generic door The guys on the floor know how to make that draw die, how to develop it. It was all up in our heads, right? They knew where we needed to stretch and not stretch and hold a certain way. But today we have draw die simulators, and they're about 80% correct, you know. So
So do you inherit all the CAD files from the designer then, and then the simulator works against that information to figure out what it's going to do and how it's going to bend the shape?
okay, so what you have to understand is when I was first into these doing draw die developments, we didn't have simulators. And then I went into high volume manufacturing. So when the simulators came out, I was no longer involved in today's simulators. But I know people in the industry who use it, and we talk about it today. And they say it's actually 80% accurate, you know. So that's how I can tell you. I can't tell you more in the detail because I haven't touched base on it. I know quite a bit, but remember, I don't know everything.
Yeah.
You know, I don't believe nobody will know everything, but we do our best.
So you're already pretty intimate with how to stamp out the gull in doors, right? A door is a door is a door.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
when I look at the new design, I look at that front end, and as gorgeous as it is, it kind of throws me for this one piece clamshell, similar to like a Viper or a Lotus Elise, and with the reverse popping hood like an E30 or a Corvette. So do you see
Right.
that as maybe one of the more challenging pieces to create on the new car?
Yes, absolutely. You know, um, so you have to remember when you look at a car and you look at all the shapes, right? You have to remember a die and a press only run straight up and down. So when you design your die, you have to design the shape in the tip of the actual, say, we'll say a fender, right? Well, it has to be tipped a certain way for backdraft angles, right? Because that press only runs perpendicularly, right? That's it. So that's what we look into, right? So we know this, so we figure out how we're going to get the shape. Do we need another die to get a certain angle to kick it in? So and we have to remember that press only goes straight up and down, right? So
Do you think that with the advent of technology, we're gonna lose some of um, what is gained by somebody like you who has all the knowledge because you understand the process so intimately? You have the ability to have the we as humans can put together much more disparate information than a computer because the computer has to be told to do so. And from what you've been describing and from working with you, it seems as though these new simulators are going to actually start to cause some loss of innovation in this process because the masters will no longer be able to pull a car apart in their head and figure out how to do it better.
exactly, exactly, exactly right. Yeah. Um, it's kind of like learning math, right? We didn't have calculators years ago. You had to learn and just do it, right? So once you get a calculator, well, you lose the ability to learn your math skills, right? It's the same thing with simulators, right? You need to learn hands-on, you know, to really get a grasp on it. You know, they're these simulators, they're just aids to help, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, same thing. If you have it, then you rely on it as a crutch, right? Uh, but it's a help. It's a tool. It's an aid. That's why we call it aids, right? It's a simulator. But yeah, you're right.
So what
There's
was,
some
oh, no, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was going to say there's some value in what's learned when you have to work through troubleshoot things. I just from working with you, so my experience working with Tony is he's able to come up with some of the most fantastic ideas and thoughts just out of the blue because you'll start talking about some component of the car, and hearing him describe it, I can now picture every conversation that he was picturing everything in his head and picking it apart. And just listening to this conversation, that's a masterful skill that has to come from years of troubleshooting. Myself, as a technologist, I say that I'm somebody who became a master of all technology to go on and become a red teamer, because I have gremlins that follow me everywhere. To this day, today I had to build a virtual environment over again for the third time because of my gremlins. So I say that's how I learned how to be such a computer master, was everything going wrong and figuring it out. And Tony has talked about just some of the ways that he's been able to innovate solutions that I think have led to somebody who can understand how to, change things and bring you to a new way of doing it. Right.
I mean, a lot of that stems through learning by failure, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
and the age-old adage, practice makes perfect, right? So we
Oh
have to
yeah,
keep at
so,
it.
so I always have a saying: you learn by doing.
Yep.
Yes.
They'll just throw you to the wolves and you go to work, right? You figure it out, because if it's not you, who else is it going to be, right? And that's kind of what we do, you know.
Tony's going to teach me how to do it all, including forging and fire, because now everybody in the world wants to do that, and Tony's going to teach us.
You can
We'll
thank
have you
History Channel for that.
Yeah.
We'll have you doing it blindfolded before you know it.
So let's rewind the Wayback Machine for a moment. What
Yeah.
was one of the most challenging things for you as the tool and die guy on the DMC-12? Was it the gull wing doors, or was there something else about the original car that posed, a challenge that you had to kind of adapt and overcome to?
The doors were the most challenging. The hood's flat. That was the easy part, you know.
Well, isn't there all controversy over that too? Depending on when it was built, the hoods are actually different, or so you guys changed something?
Well, if you understand the process of manufacturing,
Flap or no flap? I lose track of all
right,
these
right.
details.
So we call those engineering changes. Or developments along the way. So yeah, those are the things we do, right? We either put a flap in or no flap, you know.
When they make these, when the incremental changes are made on modern cars on the DeLorean, what happens to the old dies? Are they able to be modified to be repurposed? Are they just gotten rid of? What happens to them?
So no, so small changes we can modify the die, right? Yeah, it's fairly easy. Yeah, there's no reason to make for a small change to make a whole new die, no. Not unless you have a radical change, where it makes sense.
When they get rid of a model year, so the Corvette is C8, so C7 body dies. What happens to those? Do those get destroyed so that nobody can make them, or do they get sent to somebody who can then continue to make them aftermarket?
Yes, what happens to the old body dies is they still have to make replacement parts for 10 years afterwards. So for replacement parts, usually before the end of the run, they'll try to stock up the warehouse for service parts, right? But after that, they'll have another company just run service parts. That's all they do. They'll just run service parts for the 10 years for whatever, damage, rust, or whatever, you know. And that's the way it is. After the 10 years, well, I'd have to say, what's the demand of the vehicle, right? Oh, here, perfect example, right? 55 through 57 Thunderbird. You remember the story on that one, right? So, no. Anyway, so I don't know if you want to get into it, I had worked for the Bud Company in Detroit, right? In the late 80s. And the Thunderbird Club bought and stored the dies there. And we ran replacement parts in the late 80s for the 55 through 57 Thunderbird. So it depends on the demand. So you think maybe you just have to run service parts for 10 years, but that's not always true, right? Depending on the demand of the vehicle. Of course, DMC is one of them, right? we still need replacement parts 40 years later, right? So it just depends, but for the most part, they usually have to run service parts.
Notice he said nobody kept the 58 to 60 square bird dies, though. They were like, no, we're putting those in the ocean. Nobody wants parts for those.
Uh,
So you've
supply
had
and
a
right?
go ahead.
Supply and demand, right?
So Tony, you've had a very extensive career in the automotive industry. Like you said, you met John at MSI and you know, you worked at DMC and everything else, but you also found yourself at Chrysler for a long time. And so I wonder, you know, tell us about some of the cars you worked on, some of the things that we would notice right away and go, that's a car that Tony V, you know, built the dies for. Are there and don't say the
It
K
wasn't
cars,
all me, right? It
please.
was at this point, it's a company, right? It's not
Yeah.
me. But what I was involved in at Chrysler was the Ram truck, the Dodge Dakota, Jeep Grand Cherokee, Chrysler's minivan, and part of the regular Cherokee. So I had covered all those vehicles.
Interesting. I thought you were going to say like, you know, Aries K car, but no, that's
No,
okay.
no, 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 no. Well, we did do some stampings for those, right?
Or the
For the
Viper.
most
I mean, come on,
part,
right?
it was, what I told you, but
No, I'm just kidding. I'm
yeah,
a kid.
no, it's all good. Hey, parts have to
Didn't
get.
Mike didn't Mike work on parts for the Viper though?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So
Yeah.
Mike, he had a little different career than me. He just stayed with 40 years, and he got the chance to do all the exotic vehicles, right? But yeah, Mike got to work on the Ford GT, uh, custom made panels, right? Uh, Heat involved, right? For some of those shapes. But he also worked on the Viper, um, numerous other vehicles, but those are the big ones, right? You know.
So Mike is the other gentleman on our team who works with Tony in Detroit,
Yes,
who also worked on the first cars that were built in Detroit. So
Nice.
yes. Yeah, both Mike and I worked on the DMC together, you know. But
So were you in Ireland then with everybody else
no,
or
no, 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 no. Everything, all that was done in Detroit.
and then shipped overseas for assembly?
Yeah, so what had happened was the prototype dies were done here in Detroit. The prototype build was done here in Detroit. But then they had the die. I don't know everything, right? But I can tell you the story. I don't know everything about the DeLorean, but I can tell you what I do know. It was made in Ireland, and obviously they had production dies, you know, but everything here was off a prototype.
they're the first 500 cars were actually manufactured here in Detroit with the prototype dies. That's the story that I've been told about where
So
that the shop.
So basically, the first 500 were done in Detroit.
interesting.
Yeah.
So are they do they still exist? Because I've heard things about the VIN numbers don't start at one and all that kind of thing.
That part of the story, I don't know, you know, uh, but
Because there are the early variants. Even there's the pictures of your dad with Giugiaro with the JZD and then the DSV that preceded it and all that kind of stuff. So I wonder where those cars ended up. Are they in a museum somewhere? Are they locked in a crate like with the dies?
What's weird is that I know that my dad had 6 that were on our farm in New Jersey. I have a photograph of them. So who knows? Maybe the first
I know
500 cars
the
are
Peterson Museum has one of the prototypes, don't they? I believe.
there's I think 3 known proto. So there's proto 1 and then proto 2, but there's also another prototype car that to some extent exists. But I believe, I don't know. There's but the first 500 DMCs, it's very interesting because you're not the first person to ask, where are these cars? Where are these cars? And I have no idea. this is a new mystery that's turned up. Maybe somebody knows.
maybe it's like when you get a checkbook for the first time and they ask you what number you want to start at, and you just kind of go from there.
It could.
I believe historically they'll either use the prototypes for crash test, right? Maybe they weren't so-called street legal at the time. Maybe they have to destroy them. You
Yeah.
know,
That's a good point because a lot of the cars were crashed for crash tests. So it could be that a good portion of them were crash tested. And it could be that the early cars too belong to special enough people that they're locked away in
yeah, so
somebody's
they never know.
really special collection. Yeah, we just don't know. But it's definitely a question that has come up quite a few times during this journey. What happened to your dad's cars, and what happened to the early cars, and why did the VINs all weird? So I don't know. Hopefully we'll find out.
We'll get to the bottom of it for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll cut this out, but it is just off the record. It's sort of puzzling because there's no way they could have destroyed 500 cars, and I hate to say it this way, being budget strapped, that's super wasteful. You know what I mean? So,
No, I honestly wanted to say maybe they're sitting in some warehouse in Utah
yeah, right.
that I'm gonna stumble upon.
That's what's at Area 51. It's the first 500 DeLoreans.
Exactly. That's what's sitting there.
Hey, Back to the Future, right?
100%. God.
You know what was funny all about this is when we were building this car, right? We had no idea a movie was going to come out.
Yeah, that's true.
So, when the movie came out, I about fell down, right? I was like, oh my God, right? This thing's really set in stone. It was just it was a whole new venture.
And you know what's funny about that, and I'm sure people are either rejoicing or rolling their eyes. It's one or the other, but it was mutually beneficial if you think about it, both for DeLorean as it was for the movie team, because the movie wouldn't be the same with any other car, and the car now lives on because of the movie. So they had to coexist, otherwise they would have both failed at that moment. You know what I mean? So
yes, absolutely, you're right. You're right.
So when they do Back to the Future 4, it'll have the new car in it, right? That's the plan, Kat?
I keep pitching, the next generation DeLorean, Marty's kids. Come on, it fits.
I think it
right?
works too. Exactly.
It just fits.
Got to get Michael J. Fox to do a cameo first.
Yeah.
But
funny story. Somebody asked me if I knew him, and I said I met him, but not for the reason you think. Later in my life, my stepsister was his manager, and he came over to my mother and stepfather's house for dinner. Isn't that crazy?
How nice is that, huh?
Oh, so that's how I met Michael J. Fox. Had nothing to do with Back to the Future or any events. He was at my house for dinner with my stepsister.
So did he ask you anything about the car?
I definitely know we did not talk about Back to the Future at Christina's house. We're gonna go ahead and say that.
Well, let's bring us into the future and talk more about the new car. So you've had a long illustrious career, working in different organizations within Motown in Detroit, and now you find yourself as the senior director of manufacturing and quality for DNG. So what are you thinking? Like, this is huge.
Way huge, way huge. I am so honored to be working with Kat and Jason and on the car and everybody. It's such an honor, right? I'm excited. I'm ecstatic. There's no words to describe it, right? Grateful, something I've always wanted to do, right? Whatever I could do to help, because what John has done for me, right?
And not only that, I think a lot of people might be thinking, well, manufacturing and quality, that's like after the fact, right? Especially the quality part. But you're involved in the process right now, right alongside Angel, who's refining the design. Everybody else is getting involved, in this massive circus that is what car companies are, right? Like we talked about in the intro, it's so many people to make this happen. So what are you thinking about? You're obviously interfacing with a bunch of people. What have you suggested? Any changes yet? Other things that are on your mind about the new design?
The new design in my head, I want to make exactly as Angel would want, the best of my ability. We're going to give them. If we have to change something for a reason, well, we're going to talk about it, right? And tell them what I see fit for a form, right? Or how we're going to match up a door to a quarter panel, right? Or a hood to a fender, or vice versa, or whatever. But that's what we go through, right? But we want to try to give Angel exactly what he wants, what he's looking for.
So have you already started prototyping or have you already started putting together the prototype dies yet? And I guess the question that we didn't ask that goes along with that, how long does it take to construct a die?
Well, that's a huge question. Usually once we get the green light to go, 3 months, you know, that's about it.
And that also depends on the material you're making it out of, right? Because
yeah, the die yeah, it depends on the material, right? We'll have to tune it in to the type of material we use, but the shape will generally be the same. We'll just change the process a little bit.
So if the decision gets made to go 100% stainless again, do you see anything getting in the way of making that successful? Or has the manufacturing process for stainless changed enough in the last 40 years that it's just like anything else?
When I first saw the new car design, I pictured everything in stainless and what it would take to make it work. If you could do that in stainless, you could make it out of anything after that point, you know. Hey, you locked up on me. You're not moving. Your
Am I
head.
moving now?
Oh, yes, you are. There you go.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought she was giving me the signal. This is like, I'm gonna cut your throat.
No,
Like, shut up.
no, no. So this is actually a great time to talk about some of the challenges that arose trying to make the car out of stainless. So we have a couple of different, I guess, things that we need to address in creating a car in a company. And there's a whole order of operations that should go in, which was blown away by everybody coming and saying, here you go, let's skip all the steps. So we have a situation where we have a lot of things before most people normally would, including the whole team of incredible people and actually an engine and all sorts of things that we shouldn't have at this point. And one of the things that posed a really, really critical challenge was making the car out of stainless steel, the funding that's required to do so, and the challenge of working with the metal in the time that we have to actually build a show car. So we are working to address a lot of different things in how we actually manufacture the car out of stainless. And one of the challenges that I've given my team is how do we still my father is not the only person that I need to honor in making this car. It's also the people who've kept his legacy alive all these years. So it doesn't matter if John would have made it out of stainless today. It has to have stainless to honor the people who really want to see it in stainless. But given what we have available to us today, can we leverage what new technologies, new ways of manufacturing, new ideas that we can use to make it lighter? Because the stainless car is heavy. So what can we do to actually manufacture it and still maintain that look and then have something that's lighter. A lot of the ways that we've come up with, they either work or they don't. One of the other things that is important to address is the positive intent of the stainless, which was to make it cost effective for the owner to maintain. So if we can't make it out of a solid stainless panel for whatever reason, what can we do to honor that aspect? How do we still make it look the same, have the same stylistic aspects to it, and be able to meet the challenges? And as we go along, we're taking notes of the changes and the things that we have to do, because it allows us to address the questions such as, why does the DeLorean have a Renault engine? There are reasons for these things, and they all have to do with the challenges that we're currently facing in trying to manufacture this car exactly the way my father did. So Tony has been incredible coming up with some really unique out of the box ways that we might be able to actually build this car and keep it 2,500 pounds instead of 3,200 pounds, and make it actually go really fast and handle very well.
That comes under advanced manufacturing, I would say.
Yeah. It's been a lot of fun though, because what we also get to do is think outside the box and brainstorm some pretty crazy and fun ideas. And these guys are brilliant. And I'm having the time of my life learning things I never thought I didn't know about making cars.
Well, now's a perfect opportunity time to do this right now, right? So it's fabulous.
I've said before too, if you look back in automotive history, we're sort of repeating ourselves in a way, not necessarily the DeLorean story. What I'm getting at is, if you look at the 1920s versus the 2020s, in the original 20s, there were all these boutique manufacturers. And you see it now with the rise and the advent of EVs. Every time you turn around, some new company is developing some alternative fuel vehicle, whether it's electric, hydrogen, or otherwise. And then eventually the market course corrects itself and they get absorbed by the bigger companies, just like they did back then. So, and then the truly inventive survive, right? And then they flourish from that point. So I see that with this car in a lot of ways, and all the things that I've been privy to thus far, the kind of the out of the box thinking and revolutionary ideas. I think you guys are at the pointy end of the spear when it comes to some of these techniques. I'm really curious to see how it plays out, because the engine packaging alone makes a huge difference on the body panels themselves, because internal combustion engine, or a hybrid even for that matter, you don't have to worry so much as like a negatively charged body like you would end up with in an EV. And then you have issues with, if it wasn't in stainless steel, with the painting process, and even let's say the car care application process. You have to get specially manufactured waxes and things to work with EVs. A lot of people don't realize that when they buy a Tesla or a Lucid Air or something like that. So to your point, Kat, there's so many different pieces of this. It's not, down to the, how do we do the LEDs and the brake light, to, how do we keep it light? How do we make the body panels and all that? And I think there's some compromises out there. We talked about this with Angel. It's like maybe a composite material, something space age, something that hasn't been thought of before, or maybe even, it came to me the other day, is the community, the car enthusiast, the car hobby community has really embraced wrapping cars now. And I've seen metallic wraps where they're super thin sheets of different types of very pliable or ductile metals. Okay, never mind.
No,
I'm a soothsayer.
I love that you brought that up, because that is one of the things that we are examining. Because again, there is a huge challenge with building a car in Detroit, which is what we've promised and what we are working to do. And I want to manufacture it there because I want to be able to give work to the people who are there, which is more important to me than the building of the car. But when you have people who can hand build the car out of composite materials and produce the same car without actually having to build any dies, and you can save money like that, you have an opportunity to produce something that you can actually show people while you work on the manufacturing process. Because you do have to build those dies. And one of the ways that we've been talking about is, if you hand build the car out of composite, the stainless panels become something that is much more of a challenge because then they would have to be hand formed for the car. Well, that's a little Pagani area for me when it comes to the price of the car. And I love those cars, but I'd like to not have mine cost that. So one of the things that I asked was specifically, can we get a wrap that would look? And I was told that that would not translate quite as well, but we are looking into an alternative way to actually create that thin sheet of metal to go on top. One of the problems that has is it becomes merely a stylistic component. And then we have the aspect of the body panels could end up in a landfill because they can't be recycled and broken back down. So if we do that, if we cover the composite with the metal, how can we then recover the materials from it and turn it into something that, again, matches my father's positive intent? Because part of the reason why the panels were in stainless was so that they could be sent back to the factory, melted back down, and body panels made from crashed cars, making it incredibly cost effective for the owner to actually own. Now, all of these things are next to impossible to implement into a one-off prototype car. So having something that's going to be affordable in a prototype is not a realistic thing. But we're using this whole process to find out, how do we reduce the cost of manufacture? What materials can we use? What processes? How can we distribute the manufacturing to actually bring the cost down by simply going to unique places never thought of before? And how do we create a new way of doing it and a new way of building the car where we can give both the people what they want and still be able to meet these challenges? So if I fail, you'll know why I failed and how I failed and what needs to be done differently in order to succeed next time. But we're going to have a car. It's going to be amazing. And it better be stainless steel of some kind.
Yeah, and we'll get it, not a problem.
The fun part's going to be everybody being able to learn a little bit more than they ever knew before about how this all goes down, because we're going to take everybody along with us and explain what's going on to tell my father's story. So hopefully that adds an aspect of.
That's the fabulous part about this, bringing people on board and collaborating different stories together, right? And learning from one another, Again, I'm extremely happy to be part of this. I'm ecstatic, and it's going to be a great venture,
I think it's truly the way that we're working together, from what I've been learning about how everything's always been done before. It's truly a unique experience, and the way that we're going about it and the way that everybody has come together to do this. The collaboration, the minds, the people who come forth to participate has. See, now I silenced my phone.
Wasn't me.
Yeah, the people who've come together to make this happen have astonished me. They're truly geniuses. Together, we are definitely my father's mind. I can tell you that much, which is saying a lot. But
well,
it's
thank you for orchestrating all this, right?
you all found me. No, you all found me and said, let's build a car. And all I'm here is to be the person to run the meeting. It's really all I do. But I guess that's what a leader's job is to let their people do exactly their great stuff. But they truly are remarkable. And I don't think anybody has ever had this much fun building something as stressful as a car company.
Well, we try to keep it fun as much as we can. Right? There's a serious side to it, but we have fun along the way.
For sure.
I just love collaborating on different ideas all the time. It's just fabulous. CAD has me really thinking outside the box when it comes to being creative on manufacturing. And the ideas that we come up with it's just awesome. And I thank Kat for teaching me how to really think outside the box.
So, Tony, let me ask you this. With your experience in the industry, I mean, obviously you're bringing that to the table, which is, to Kat's point, kind of shortcutting the process. And there's a lot involved in this, but you're passing that knowledge on, right? Rather than us going, how do we use a simulator to make this work? But there's the other side of the D&G paradigm here, which is the STEM program. So I want to kind of address your involvement in that and how you take everything that's in, your vast experience and translate that down to high school and college kids that don't know, a spanner from a wrench at the end of the day. So how are you planning on turning this into an educational moment for them?
See what their knowledge is at the time and keep it simple enough to where they understand it and run with it from there.
So are you going to have them maybe building scaled versions of the dies and stuff to stamp out like smaller models?
You can do that. Yes, absolutely.
1/18th scale, please. That's all I'm going to say about that. But
So, what was funny is when Kat and I first met, we got on a conversation. They asked me, can we source some fenders or parts out of stainless? And my first question is, sure. How many you want? Right? Then it turned into building a car. Okay. And then I said, okay, how many you want? So just having that knowledge and to be able to pass it on to somebody, for me, it'd be easy, right? But to explain it to somebody, and a person can only grasp so much knowledge at once, right? So you have to be careful and keep it simple in the beginning and work with it and go from there. Once you know the whole process, it's fairly fundamental, but it just depends on a person and how fast it clicks, you know.
My experts that I have, what I've been asking them along the way is for what I like to call how to put on your socks. So Jason told me about a basketball coach. Who is it? Why do I always forget? Wooden? Yeah, who would have his players hit their socks on correctly with the seam in the correct place, because then they could play longer without their feet hurting. So what we want to do is, what are those fundamental things to think about and teach and create muscle memory for what will create a good manufacturer or a good engineer. And so each of my experts in the field, particularly useful are people who have that knowledge prior to simulators, it seems. What are the things that we could have the students do that will form this fundamental knowledge that can then be built upon when they go into the job space and create somebody who has a stronger foundation to be able to learn it faster? Because, and Dan Milliman, in his book The Complete Warrior's Way, he said he was a coach of gymnastics, and he said that he sees natural talent as the ability to learn something faster, not the ability to learn something better. It's just that other people need more time to be taught it. So if we can bring people up to that base level by giving them the exercises and the practice to be able to, the foundational knowledge they need to be able to learn it on the job just as fast as everybody else, or send them with the skills to know how to ask for what they need to be able to get what they need to learn it the way that everybody else does, then we can create people who can just excel and enjoy what they're doing. So I've been working a lot, asking a lot of questions, and Tony helped me very early on to map out some of the classes. We have certain, the vocational schools, generally most public schools don't start They start a little earlier in Detroit, but in most schools you can't take auto shop until junior year. So we want to have something that can actually work with the educational, with the other teachers, and be able to tie their knowledge in their automotive program to other subjects. For instance, how did World War II impact the automotive industry, so that you understand how that happened? Or what can you learn about your customers in sociology, and how that can impact how you design a car, because you understand more about humanity. Everything that we learn as we're out there experiencing the world, every subject that we take pertains to what goes into automotive design, because it's all about the people, the marketing, the build, the manufacturing, the safety. All of these things have components in all of the subjects we learn. So how do we teach them to think about all of it and put it all together in the end? And that's where my experts come in. But I'll tell you a secret that I haven't divulged yet. We are working on virtual reality manufacturing labs for the students to be able to practice some of these skills and immerse them in things that they normally wouldn't be able to experience due to safety or location.
That's
Very
awesome.
cool. Very cool.
So, and I got to do it with fun story. I go to a car show in Celebration, usually in the spring. I haven't gone since COVID, but it's an amazing car show. And they raise money for Make-A-Wish. And I got to meet these two wonderful people, Douglas Saunders and Nick Kambata there. And they're just incredible and so much fun. And we've become really good friends over the years. And they've been working on this incredible virtual reality platform that they're focusing on for what it's designed for now. But I said, as we go and build this out, would you consider working on a virtual reality lab? So hopefully we can make that a reality too, because that would expand access to this knowledge to so many more students. And that's what we're trying to do.
Nice.
So Tony, obviously the program is going to be limited in the number of, people that we can put in the seats, pun intended, in the DNG, STEM program. So for the listeners out there, or maybe even folks that are in the industry right now, I happen to know a few myself, any words of wisdom, anything you can pass on to them, so maybe some lessons learned in the field that you'd like to share with these folks to say, again, you can do it too.
Yeah, anybody can do it if you just want to apply yourself, being guided, I guess, biggest thing is given the opportunity to do it. Okay, so given the opportunity in working with a group of people and bounce out ideas off of one another is just how it's done, pass this knowledge down to everybody we can, to the next generation. That's what I'm going to enjoy doing. I can't wait. But yeah.
Well, with that said, Kat and or Tony, anything else you'd like to shout out, promote, or share with us, or divulge that we haven't covered thus far?
I go let Kat run with that one.
I'm gonna always thank my team, including you, Eric, because without you guys, I could definitely not be doing what I'm doing right now. I am only as good at this as all of you are helping me be. So always and always thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Again, it's everybody involved, right? The extreme cooperation is just fabulous.
All right, I'm going to read the outro just for audio consistency. It seems stupid. I should just be cutting and pasting it, but here we go. The DeLorean Legacy Project is dedicated to extolling the positive impact of John Z. DeLorean and his creations on this world that continue to this day through the fans and owners of his cars. The DeLorean Legacy's... God, why does this always get me? The DeLorean Legacy Project's mission is to change the world one person at a time. To learn more about the project, check out www.deloreanlegacy.org or follow them on social at DeLorean Legacy on Twitter. You can catch up with Kat on social media at Kat DeLorean on Instagram, at Catherine.DeLorean on Facebook, and you can learn about this stellar new cutting edge technology DNG Motors vehicle inspired by Angel, Tony, and a cast of other folks at www.dngmotors.com or follow the car's build progress at dng.motors on Instagram and Facebook or at dngmotors on Twitter. So, Tony, I can't thank you enough for coming on Break Fix and sharing your wealth of experience with us, talking us through the old days of both the DMC 12 and the heyday of Motown, and sharing some of your insight on how the new car is going to be built. So we'll be keeping up with you and watching the progress. And I think all of us are saying the same thing. We can't wait to see this thing in person.
Hey, thank you for having us. Thank you for hosting us, and we'll be talking again, right? I can't wait.
Awkward, pregnant, pause. All right, I'm just gonna let it go. Yeah, did we miss anything? Anything you want to go back, redo, address? We're all good?
No, it was great. My face always hurts when I'm done on your show from smiling so much.
She's not doing this. Like, all right, I'm gonna pause.